Hey, this is Blondeguygamer and welcome to another Black Sheep game review. It has been a while since I did a full-fledged episode in this, and the last few games that were covered...
Worst plot twist villain ever! Glad the update added analog control and not fix any bugs. Did the game just freeze? On the final boss? We have to fight a third stupid penis mouth!
Didn't exactly go very well, which is why I'm going with an actually competently made game this time. Halo Wars, which is part of the Halo games. If you couldn't tell.
So, Halo. It's quite the popular first-person shooter franchise for Microsoft, selling millions of copies, garnering critical acclaim, and having a huge multiplayer base online. Though when it comes to my own personal experiences with the series, I do like it, but I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan. I enjoy the gameplay and the sci-fi setting and story elements enough, despite being a little samey and cliched between them all. But because I'm not too big on playing with random people competitively online, I mostly just play the campaigns by myself or cooperatively with friends and my brother. Because of that, I'm more of a casual player of the games, but I won't deny the popularity. Even if it does get a little overblown with its marketing often catering towards the stereotype of gamers not all of us want to be associated with. Still, it hasn't stopped me from playing them anyway, and we do have Halo 5 coming out in October for the Xbox One, which, despite that and maybe a few other games, isn't quite enough for me to get an Xbox One right now. It also doesn't help that I just bought a new computer, so it's a little out of my budget at the moment, though I may still get this system in Halo 5 eventually. Besides, Halo is pretty much a flagship for Microsoft consoles, and with the Master Chief Collection, it is certainly good value if you want to play through Halo 1 through 4 nowadays. Online issues notwithstanding. However, one of the Halo games not on that collection is indeed Halo Wars. The main reason I want to talk about this as a black sheep is that it's actually not a typical Halo game, but a real-time strategy prequel. Let me put it this way, a few years back I reviewed Command & Conquer Renegade, a first-person shooter spin-off from a real-time strategy series. With Halo Wars, it's the opposite, an RTS from an FPS series. Not only that, but this is a console-exclusive real-time strategy game, which, while there have been console versions of RTS games, are not very common due to the PC being the preferred platform for that genre.
It is understandably wary over that, but I can safely say that Halo Wars works both as a console RTS and Halo spin-off. But the question is, how much does it work? Well, get your Doritos Mountain Dew ready, because we're gonna find out.
Halo Wars released on March 3rd, 2009 for the Xbox 360, about a week after the Japanese and European releases surprisingly, and was developed not by Bungie but Ensemble Studios, makers of primarily the Age of Empires series. So we already have a credible studio that brought us good RTS games for Halo Wars, and what's also interesting in that its initial concepts, the first Halo was planned to be an RTS at one point, so the idea of that went towards a spin-off. Development for Halo Wars started as early as 2004, when Ensemble began work on a console RTS with their Age of Mythology game engine. They then spent over a year developing a control scheme that would work for consoles, and after presenting the idea to Microsoft, the project became Halo Wars. The fact that this much development was made shows that Ensemble did bring effort for a working console-exclusive RTS design. As for how this game ties in with the series, Halo Wars takes place in the year 2531, about 20 years before Reach in the first game, where the Human United Nations Space Command, UNSC for short, are in an intergalactic war with the Covenant, a theological group of alien species hell-bent on wiping out humanity. During the campaign, you play as humans from the UNSC ship, the Spirit of Fire, commanded by Captain James Cutter and operated by AI Serena. Among the other crew are Sergeant John Force to lead ground forces and Professor Ellen Anders, who is tasked to research ancient ruins from the long-lost Forerunners, which the Covenant are also keen on, as they worship the Forerunners and hope to use their ancient but highly advanced technology against the UNSC. In Halo Wars, one such force to try and do so is led by the Arbiter, an elite Covenant don in ceremonial armor that's usually tasked with special missions. Oh, and because this takes place before Halo 2 and 3, this isn't the same Arbiter from those games, but rather a previous one. Before I bore some people that may not care about extensive lore in the Halo universe, I should go over how the game works. Halo Wars is quite streamlined for an RTS, if only because of its design to work with a 360 controller. You move a cursor with the left analog stick to select units with the A button, or all units with the left bumper button, and then the X button over hostiles to initiate attacks. Units also have special attacks or abilities with the Y button, most of which require cooldown times after using them. As for bases, they have a simple grid-like design with sections you select what to build or upgrade through radical menus. New buildings and units cost supplies, which you can find out in the field for your soldiers to pick up, but the majority of them come in from a steady stream from built supply pads that generate resources. As you build your base, reactors are needed to increase your technology level in order to lock higher tech levels of units and upgrades. While you can only fortify bases with turrets on 4 corners, I do like how accessible base building and upgrading is. It allows you to be efficient with your base micromanaging and strategies. For example, in later missions you can build multiple bases, and what I like to do is have one base produce units while the other focuses on upgrades, which applies to every unit regardless of where and when it was made. Supplies can also be used for powers available from the Spirit of Fire by pressing up on the D-pad. These range from powerful orbital blasts to repairing vehicles and buildings in a set radius. Because of how the game plays, it can be easier to get into than your typical real-time strategy game, but veteran players of more complex entries in the genre may find the catering to a more casual audience lacking in comparison. There's also the fact that while the tutorial is optional, it actually doesn't teach you everything you can do in this game. It still shows you the basics of how to play the game, but it's rather bare bones. For example, the tutorial doesn't tell you any of the following: holding A to expand a reticule to manually select units for a group, pressing the R trigger to cycle through individual units of a selected group, which is pretty necessary if you want to use a specific unit special ability, not everyone's all at once, double tapping on a unit twice to select all of that type of unit nearby, and holding the left trigger to scroll the cursor faster, just to name a few. It's not like I want to force a tutorial to teach you all the controls at once, but if you're willing to learn everything through an optional one in a game like Halo Wars, then the least you can do is better tell you what you can do in this. The only way you would know about these besides finding out by yourself is from reading the manual, the prompts that show up in the first few missions anyway, or from loading screen and menu tips. Half-assed tutorial aside, it is possible to get by with simple tactics, but it does leave a little to be desired if you're used to tactical options from PC-centric real-time strategy games, such as being able to create and toggle between 2 or more groups of units, which even some console ports of PC RTS games still had, but Halo Wars does not. Closest you can have to managing multiple groups is the aforementioned double tapping A to select all of one Titan nearby, or the holding down A to select specific units for a group. And even then, trying to coordinate those can get a little cumbersome, especially when you try to control 2 fronts at once. It may actually be a little easier to do that with the right bumper to select all local units on screen instead of all global with the left, but it was yet another thing the tutorial doesn't outright tell you can do, and I unfortunately neglected it despite some prompts for it. I guess I was paying more attention to the game when those showed up. There's also the fact that the pathfinding isn't exactly the best. It becomes the biggest issue when you try to move units past others, that they often just stop dead in their tracks without taking detours or other units moving out of the way. Despite those criticisms, the overall structure of Halo Wars is still functional as an RTS since it utilizes a rock-paper-scissors formula between the 3 main types of units. Infantry is generally stronger against aircraft, armored vehicles is strong against infantry, and aircraft is effective against vehicles. Though different types of those units, as well as special abilities and upgrades, do change things up to not be strictly on those strategies. A safe bet is just to make a large group of assorted units to attack everything, which is what I tend to do most of the time in RTS games anyway, as haphazard as it is, but in Halo Wars it was effective for me most of the time, even with the sometimes janky pathfinding and having to manually select specific units for their special abilities. So you don't necessarily have to divide and coordinate groups of units, but it still would be helpful if it was handled better. Though keep in mind that, like the other Halo games I've played, I just played the campaign on the normal difficulty setting. And while I did fail missions a few times, the game was still pretty lenient, most likely to cater Halo fans that may not play RTS games. As content as I am with the game quality overall, I will admit Halo Wars does feel like it's just going through the notions, particularly in the story of the campaign. It does the job of being a prequel game in the Halo universe, but the events that play out are rather standard. The characters are especially bland, even with credible voice actors like Nolan North as Forge and Kim My Guest as Anders, but they are character tropes you've already seen before. The benevolent captain, the wisecracking tough soldier, the determined professor, the snarky AI, and the all of 2 main Covenant antagonists don't fare any better. They literally just want to kill all humans. It might have been a little more interesting if you could play as them too in a separate campaign, but you can only play as the Covenant during skirmish modes, although it was omitted due to constraints during the game's development. Still, as of right now, Halo 2 is the only game where you did play as a Covenant during this campaign, and while some didn't favor that at the time, it would have had more to offer content story-wise than something like Halo Wars. That's not to say the single-player campaign with just the UNNC is bad despite the average story and characters. It offers 50 missions throughout, which while not terribly long, at least doesn't drag on. The mission variety is fine, some of which are the standard real-time strategy fare: assaulting, defending, escorting, reaching an objective, and so on. But some do change things up a little, like a couple missions to be on top of the Spirit of Fire with airlocks to produce units instead of ground bases. The best way I can describe this game is that it's a typical RTS, only more Halo-y, if that is a term. Speaking of which, while there is no Master Chief, you do get to command older model Spartans, which are the most powerful soldier units, so naturally you only have access to a few of them in any given mission. This was limited to balance the game, as not only are they strong, but they can also hijack enemy vehicles like in the other Halo games as their special ability, effectively stealing enemy units. And if that wasn't enough, the Spartans given to you in the campaign missions, and characters like Forge, can be revived by having friendly units near them for a short time. So even if Forge or the Spartans die in battle, they're just mostly dead until you revive them.
There's a big difference between mostly dead and all dead.
In addition to main objectives, there are also secondary objectives to make things easier and to add to your score if you do them, which helps you earn medals after each completed mission. Another aspect that's brought over from the series are skulls, which are hidden collectibles that can pop up in certain areas, and after grabbing them, you can turn on various effects, most of which can lower or increase your skull multiplier depending on what skull effect is activated. For what it's worth, the transition of Halo elements into a real-time strategy game is pretty seamless. If you're familiar with Halo games, it will still feel like a series entry while doing its own thing. For the most part. There are a few aspects to me that seem like they were included in Halo Wars simply because it had to be some kind of prerequisite for a series entry. One in particular that felt very forced is something you encounter about 2/3 in the campaign and sticks around till the end. The Flood. Now, those that already know most likely cringed or groaned at the mention of them. If you don't, the Flood is a parasitic organism that rapidly infects any biological thing and was often the bane of every player in the first Halo trilogy. Granted, I don't dislike the concept of the Flood, but fighting them can be annoying, as the Flood often overstay their welcome. In Halo Wars, it's no exception, as they behave much like they did in the main entries, constantly attacking large swarms, being able to form more Flood from dead bodies, and generally being a nuisance to try and overwhelm you. I commend Ensemble for being faithful to the Halo source material, but this is one thing from Halo I wish they didn't bring here, even for an RTS. At this point, this is the 4th time we've had to deal with the Flood in the series, and thankfully last since ODST, Reach, and 4 didn't have the Flood in their campaigns. Also, why is the Flood even in Halo Wars? This takes place years before they were initially released in the first Halo. Oh right, prequel retcon so we can have them here because they're a series staple. And yet there's no giant space Halos because this is the prequel before those were found, but this is still called Halo Wars because franchise. Or perhaps the inclusion of the Flood was to add a third faction of sorts, even though you can't play as them at all. So we can have a trifecta of human space marines, technologically advanced aliens, and the gooey parasites that just want to consume everything.
Obvious comparison is obvious.
As much as I bitched about the inclusion of the Flood in this game, it still didn't stop me from finishing the campaign, which I thought was still okay despite my complaints. Besides, the game does offer more than just the vanilla single-player mode. Much like other entries, Halo Wars does have some online multiplayer modes, though no split screen given the nature of the game. One of which is being able to play the campaign cooperatively with a friend. During missions, you each control a split of the units and can build bases on units using shared resources, effectively being able to coordinate strategies a lot easier than in single player. I can see this being fun enough if you like the idea of co-op real-time strategy games. In addition to co-op, you can also compete against others online in the multiplayer option or against AI in skirmish battles. In both, you can set up to 3 versus 3 with 3 UNSC and Covenant leaders, then you can even mix and match between them ironically. I should point out that playing the Covenant leaders is pretty interesting as their special abilities let you control them briefly, almost like a character in a MOBA. Or at least I assume that's what it's like. I haven't played any of them and this game came out before they became super popular anyway. Originally you had 2 game modes, Standard, which is building your base and units from scratch, and Deathmatch, where you're given a large amount of resources and the highest tech level at the start to go all out immediately, building more bases as you go to increase unit population capacity. Initially the game only had these 2 modes, but with DLC, additional maps and 3 more modes were added. These include Keep Away, a capture the flag mode of sorts where you hold on to a Forerunner unit to get more points, Reinforcements, which periodically gives you units based on your tech level and available supplies instead of trading them yourself, and Tug of War, in which you compete for field supremacy as indicated by a point bar. These 3 extra modes are fine, but it can be a stretch as pay for DLC, since it's just extra rules and it came out right after a patch that could have easily added those for free. However, if you get a Platinum Hits version of Halo Wars like I did, chances are it will still have codes for both the extra game modes and the map pack DLC. That way you don't have to worry about paying for those if you do want them for completion's sake. Even without the DLC, the game still feels and looks pretty solid. The presentation is about as on par with the rest of the series, with varied enough landscapes and sci-fi colors and effects that stand out. You have fluent control of the camera with the right analog stick, and the bird's eye view gives you clear visibility of the ensuing battles. Character and vehicle models from the previous games are recreated well, and ones that only appear in Halo Wars don't look out of place. Complementing the in-game visuals are computer-generated cutscenes that still hold up today by today's standards, and is the first and was the only Halo game to use these until 4. The soundtrack composed by Stephen Rippey, who worked on Ensemble's previous games, also fits with the Halo aesthetic. The ambience throughout is appropriately ominous, and a nice touch is when you attack with a large group on something like a base, the music amps up to add to the engagements. I don't need to say much else on the sound design as the effects are pretty much straight from the Halo games as you expect, and I already mentioned the voice acting, which is still good performance-wise despite the mostly plain dialogue. Also, some things like certain units commenting on the current mission when idle are good attentions to detail, although the voice clip you're bound to hear the most is All Units, that plays every time you select All Units.
All units. All units. All units. All units. All units. All units. All units. All units. All units. All units. All units.
And with that, I can say I had a good enough time with Halo Wars. If anything, the game accurately represents how I feel about the series. It's good, but I didn't go crazy over it. But to Ensemble's credit, it does tie in well with Halo, even having a timeline you can unlock entries for those that are interested in the series lore up to this game. If you like Halo at least as much as I do, then I recommend it as it's cheap to get physically or download, but I suggest hunting down a Platinum Hits copy with DLC codes. As an entry-level console RTS, it does the job and can ease Halo fans into this. If you're more accustomed to traditional real-time strategy games like StarCraft or Command & Conquer, you may be disappointed with the limited design structure of accommodating a game of this genre exclusively on a console. But sometimes a streamlined game isn't necessarily dumbing things down and can still be fun, and thankfully Halo Wars is if you don't mind a more simplified game of this nature. And it would seem that from the general reception and sales, Halo Wars did break the notion that real-time strategy games are only accessible on PC, but not without casualties. This was actually Ensemble Studios' last game, having shut down just before Halo Wars was even released. However, even a phoenix can rise from the ashes, as some of its members formed Robot Entertainment, who handled the patches and DLC afterwards and have since made Age of Empires Online and the Orcs Must Die games. Halo Wars is still regarded as the best-selling console RTS game, and while I didn't really delve into the online besides playing some with a friend, it still has a player base, even if it's mostly just 3 vs 3 deathmatches. Though it may get a resurgence as recently a sequel was announced being in the works by 343 Studios and Creative Assembly, the latter of whom is also another prominent developer known for its own RTS games, the Total War series. It's also coming out to both Xbox One and Windows 10, so the fact the sequel is coming out to PC as well may help alleviate some console restrictions and fix the few issues I did have with Halo Wars in general. Also, please don't bring back the Flood. I just jinxed it, didn't I?
You have no idea how relieved I am for covering a game here that's actually pretty decent overall. Not since Grab of the Ghoulies anyway. But that's the thing with Black Sheeps. You might be surprised at how good they actually are despite being not as variable or different. Or they could just be crap, but that's what makes it interesting. Because when we come back to another Black Sheep game review, who knows how good or bad it will be. And hopefully not take a year to make.